Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the June meeting of Leeds Council Exec Board, the first one of this municipal year. I've got a couple of things to say before we start. First of all, just to remind everybody that this meeting is webcast live and to welcome people watching online. And also just to take the opportunity to remind board members, as I did in April, that as a result of the general election being called for the 4th of July, we are currently in the pre-election period of heightened sensitivity, and that's not just the feat of those of us out campaigning. The purpose of the pre-election period is not to prevent the council from carrying out its normal business, but to prevent the business conducted by the council being used or being perceived as being used to secure any electoral advantage. Therefore, please treat this as a normal board meeting, of course, but be mindful of debate that amounts to or could reasonably be perceived to amounting to electioneering. So with that, I'm going to turn to the agenda for the meeting. Just take the formal items at the start. So item 1, are there any appeals against refusal of inspection of documents, please?
Thanks, Chair. To confirm, there's been no appeals received for today's meeting.
Thank you. Item 2, we've no exempt information today. Item 3, we have no late items, so I'll turn to the board and see if there's any declarations of interest. I don't see anybody indicating. Item 5, just to confirm that the meeting we held on the 17th of April, that the minutes are correct. Everybody's happy with those. That's great. We move on to the first substantive item, which is under Councillor Hayden's Children's and Families portfolio, and Councillor Cohen, as the Children's and Families Scrutiny Chair, is also joining us for this item. So I'll ask Councillor Hayden to introduce it, and then ask Councillor Cohen to come in, please.
Thank you, Chair. This paper updates the Executive Board as to the next steps following the PwC review of EHCP and wider SEND services. It summarises the findings of the review and sets out proposed new arrangements to improve the service and timeliness of provision. These include digital improvements, a cultural shift, bringing in external support to tackle the EHCP backlog, a more streamlined process and improved communication with families. We know that we are not delivering the level of service that we would want to, and we are taking these steps to improve both the timeliness of EHCP delivery and also the experience for children and their families as they move through this process. We have issued nearly 3 times as many EHCPs in the last financial year than we did in the previous one. Levels of demand are skyrocketing, and we, like many other local authorities across the country, have not been able to keep pace. Our staff have worked incredibly hard, but it's simply not sustainable. And I'd like to thank all the staff for their hard work under times of great stress. The steps outlined in this paper will help us achieve and maintain the changes that are needed. The external resource in the form of educational psychologists will tackle the backlog, and other changes will facilitate the reset that is needed. The proposals will continue to be informed at every stage by the views and experiences of children, parents and carers, as well as schools and other specialist settings, and will be underpinned by our principle of ensuring support is available for young children and young people who need it most. I'd like to thank the Children and Family Scrutiny Board and colleagues on the Scrutiny Board for their inquiry and input into this area. It's incredibly valuable and provides the challenge and support needed to help us get this right. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Cohen, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hayden. And thank you, Exec Board, for the opportunity to present here today, to be able to allow Executive Board to be able to note and comment upon our scrutiny reports and recommendations around educational healthcare plans. I think the scrutiny function generally is committed to ensuring we add value through the work that we undertake, and it's important that we recognise that the parity of esteem we have here in Leeds between the executive and the scrutiny board and the scrutiny function as being a real positive as we try and add value to policy development and decision making. And like Councillor Hayden, I want to thank all the officers and all the elected members, both scrutiny board members and executive members, particularly Councillors Venner and Pryor, and all the stakeholders who contributed to our report. We undertook this report and this work to significantly improve services for children and families who, when first seeking to get an educational healthcare plan, are often at their most vulnerable and in need of the council's help. As I said in the forward to the report, as elected members, it's increasingly clear that parents and carers accessing HCP support services in Leeds were having difficulty securing the outcomes they wanted for their children. They were facing frustration, anxiety, and some felt they had nowhere to turn at a time when they needed support the most. Almost every councillor in Leeds has heard through our own casework and through the regular performance updates presented to our scrutiny board that EHCPs were a growing issue. In fact, the previous scrutiny board chair, Councillor Alan Lamb, flagged this to me as an area to look at when I took over as chair, very quickly followed by the director and the exec members too. I should particularly thank Councillor Lamb for his many years of sterling work chairing the board before I took over last year. A key problem was very clearly the significant increase in demand, which was felt nationally. But we also wanted to understand the local processes to check, challenge, and where appropriate support the improvement work being developed by the directorate to drive up performance and to do so at pace. And I really stressed that part, at pace. We heard in detail from the Leeds Parent Carer Forum through a dedicated working group. As part of our evidence gathering approach, we were determined to hear from parents and carers to try to understand the scale of the problem from their perspective. This was in addition to hearing from PricewaterhouseCoopers, senior officers, executive members, and feedback from young people themselves, which came through the survey that was undertaken by the service earlier in the year. Some of the evidence presented to us, particularly from parents and carers, was genuinely heartbreaking. Some really vulnerable families having the view that Leeds just didn't care about them, their child, or their struggle to get what every child should be entitled to, an appropriate education. These weren't national issues. These were indicative, so parents told us, of a council that wasn't communicating effectively and that in essence wasn't hearing what parents were saying. What was really reassuring and a bit frustrating too was that both senior officers and executive members recognised that there was a problem, that there was real validity in the evidence that we were being presented with. Through our work, we've made 11 recommendations, and it's good to see that a number of our key points are being addressed, not least as set out in paragraph 111 of the main report itself, which relates to our recommendation 1 on the 20-week statutory timescale, or more accurately, statutory deadline. The focus on digital approaches is also welcome and will certainly assist in communication and information sharing, as well as potentially reducing call volumes as children and families are able to self-serve for updates on their EHCPs. It is a positive start, but as referenced in paragraph 1.12, there is still a huge amount to do in terms of other improvements, some of which we covered in our work around culture. And as 112 notes, we need to become far more child-centred, solution-focused, embracing change with a commitment to co-design and cooperative working with a range of stakeholders. Finally, I will note our intention to continue to monitor progress robustly on improving EHCP and SEND services as we set out in recommendation 11, and to some degree also highlighted by the intention to review FFI, which is contained within the report, which is also somewhat of a concern. We considered a performance update at our board meeting last Monday, and whilst performance against timescales has improved by 10% in the early months of 2024, and indeed EHCP completion volumes have improved significantly, The 2023 headline figure of 18.8% of plans issued within the statutory deadlines still leaves huge room for improvement. It is a real concern that these deadlines are still a long way from being met. We do, though, look forward to helping ensure we see real pace and improvement. I know this is what officers want to see. I'm certain it's what the families of our vulnerable learners need to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cohen. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If you bear with me, I have got a lot of questions on this. I won't bombard them in one go. It's a serious
That's
issue.
great. Okay.
So if I can just start by welcoming Councillor Hayden to a new portfolio, possibly a warmer welcome from me than from your colleagues looking at the agenda items they've left you to take forward today. Also, thanks to the Scrutiny Board and Councillor Cohen for the work they've done in picking up this really important issue. I know from my experience, certainly elected members, senior officers know this is a subject which is very close to my heart. I'm very heavily involved in a large number of cases. I'm pleased that you acknowledge, Councillor Hayden, that we're not getting it right for anywhere near enough families. The first questions I'd like to ask is just a confirmation around how much we've spent on the PricewaterhouseCoopers work. And as you know, I've said it before here, I can't see anything they've told us that parents haven't been telling us for years, that elected members haven't been raising for years. So can you confirm how much has been spent on that work to date and is expected to be spent, and what they've told us?
Phil, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lamb, it's an approximately £750,000 that though has been spread over 3 elements of discrete piece of work. So a discovery piece of work, a detailed design piece of work, and then some work in terms of shaping the delivery. It reflected a whole series of individuals, of colleagues from PwC who've worked very closely with us for over a period of 4 to 5 months.
Thank you. And Julie, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I suppose I'd just like to add that it was really clear to me when I was appointed as Director of Children and Families that there was a need to have a whole root and branch review in the first instance of our EHC process. And that was a result of feedback that I was receiving from key partners in the city, in particular our schools, our parents, our carers, and staff within the local authority. It was clear to me that we needed, as I say, a detailed root and branch review, which would be undertaken by individuals who did have specialism in this field. We were very careful when we commissioned PwC, and we did that on the basis of the experience that they have in this field. It was also clear to me that, as has already been highlighted, you know, this is it's a national issue. It's been recognised at a national level that the SEND system, the system that exists in this country to support children and their families, is broken. That's not to detract from the areas that we have in Leeds, which we know that we need to improve on. Core and central to the review work has been our absolute commitment and determination to achieve 100% compliance with our statutory duty and to ensure that children in the city and their families are receiving the services that they need in order to meet their identified need. In commissioning PwC, I was also very mindful that what we did need was an objective look at this and an objective review. And I felt that that was absolutely necessary in order to gain and sustain the trust of parents and carers, the trust of partners, and the trust of, you know, our key stakeholders. I think that, as Phil has said, the discovery phase, the design phase, and now the implementation plan, the detail within that, and it's moved beyond the EHCP process. to really cover our whole, the breadth of services that we deliver to children who have SEND and their families. We would not have been able to achieve that with the capacity and the resource that we have within the local authority. And I am grateful actually for the collaboration and the support that we had with PwC, and I think it's put us in a very, very good position to have a clear plan of implementation and a clear vision in terms of how we will meet our statutory duty and how we will ensure that children and families in this city get the services that they need.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you. So there's no point revisiting history. We know less than 20% of plans were delivered on time last year. I think the point Councillor Cohen makes is worth reminding ourselves of. That is not guidance, that's a legal requirement, and we only managed to fulfil it 1 in 5 times, less than that last year. And the improvements we've seen this year are not getting us anywhere close to being legally compliant. In terms of how we make progress and take this forward, what I'd like some clarity and reassurance on is particularly around the digital parts of the project. And our general experience is that we are not good at delivering this type of change at pace. I would add, I absolutely accept this is a national issue, and whoever's the government in a few weeks' time, we need to continue the joint lobbying efforts to get more money and resource into this area. But as the scrutiny report highlights, that is not the only story in Leeds. That's part of the issue. Actually, there are a lot of things, particularly around communication, just basic things that we don't get right, that we could get right, that are in our gift, regardless of the resource levels. And I see regularly on a daily basis, as officers around this table know, very senior officers having to deal with individual cases on up to and including the Director of Children's Services, including the Chief Executive, regularly involved in specific cases that have gone badly wrong and are taking up resource that should be focused on actually driving improvements. And still with that intensive focus, we're not getting the outcomes that we need. So can I get some reassurance about how we can actually deal with the very significant backlog of cases and the intense nature that they take up, as well as being able to do the work to get better systems in place at the same time? How do we achieve those things in parallel?
Julie, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Lamb. I think we have brought in additional resource. We've identified additional resource in order to ensure that those children whose assessments are currently out of timescale are brought within timescale as quickly as possible. That's including educational psychology resource. It's also including resource to write and finalise plans. We are confident that within 5 months thereabouts that we will be in a position to ensure that those children whose plans are not currently in timescale are, and we're committed to doing everything that we can to achieve that. In terms of your question, your point around digitalisation, Councillor Lamb, you're absolutely right. It is critical, and that's a key part of our transformation. You're also right that it's not just the area of children with special educational needs and disabilities that this applies to. It actually applies right across children's social care. We know at a national level, in terms of the SEND reviews that there has been, and also in terms of the Josh McAllister review, that nationally it's been identified that the children's social care system needs to get better in terms of digitalisation and reducing bureaucracy. I'm really, really pleased to say that actually we have a cross-council corporate approach to this, and that within the directorate, we feel fully supported by our corporate colleagues. We do have a delivery board, which I chair in the Children and Families Directorate, which has a number of work streams that sit underneath it, and digitalisation is one of those. In addition, we have the a working group, which again is a cross-council SEND steering group, which brings colleagues together, including our colleagues from IDS, to ensure that we've got clear plans, that we're on track, that we're monitoring progress, and taking a really proactive approach to identifying any potential barriers so that we can take remedial action. And then in addition to that, we do have the SEND partnership board, which is a multi-agency board, which again has oversight in terms of the improvement plan, and within that, the plan that we have around digitalisation. It is key because in terms of reducing bureaucracy, but most importantly, in terms of streamlining and enabling the experience and the journey of parents and carers to be better in terms of telling their story once, giving their information once, key partners within the city being able to input their information to almost like a single front door, a single point of contact, and for us then to be gathering that once and using that to best effect. But I can assure you that there is that scrutiny in terms of pace.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, it is going to take a while, but this is an important issue. I'd like to turn to an aspect of this which gives me pause for thought. So I would like to be in a position to support all the recommendations, and broadly I do. However, contained within the paper and not specifically within the recommendations is the issue of funding for inclusion, and the proposals to change the model of FFI. So at the moment, as I understand it, young people don't have to have an EHCP to get funding under FFI. This paper proposes to change that. So you would have to have an EHCP. So I've got a number of questions around that. Just as a starter, if I could ask Councillor Cohen to comment on what discussions have been had at scrutiny around this aspect of the proposals. And then I would like someone to explain what consultation has taken place with schools and settings, and how many young people are in receipt of FFI funding who don't have an EHCP at the minute.
Thank you. Councillor Cohen, would you like to come in at this point, please?
Okay. So as our scrutiny board on Monday, we did raise the fact that FFI was going to be changing. It was raised in the meeting. Obviously, we didn't have the benefit of the executive board papers before us. I think it was raised as a question by Councillor Scopes during the meeting. So it was raised at that session of the meeting, and there was a general answer given, which is why I referred to it in my statement just before.
Thanks, Councillor Cohen. Julie, you're pointing at Dan. Dan, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Leader. So a couple of questions which I'll try and take in order. First of all, in terms of probably setting the scene, the need to move away from the FFI system is part of our discharge of our legal duty. We must allow children and young people access to a statutory assessment to assess whether or not they may have special educational needs or disabilities, and that is set out in the Act from 2014 and the accompanying Code of Practice. And we have been made absolutely aware and understand and agree that the current system means that in many cases, children, whilst their needs are being met, are not getting the entitlement to a statutory assessment, and therefore the right to review and the right to appeal which accompanies that. So it's absolutely crucial that we do move away from the FFI system for children in mainstream schools. In terms of the level of consultation and joint working with schools and settings in the city, there is an enormous amount of discussion and engagement going on. from myself and all the way down to colleagues within the team, the FFI team, especially working with all schools in the city this side of the summer to identify challenges that may be upcoming for children within their settings, and trying to create a proper prioritisation matrix so we know exactly which children on FFI packages needs to transition first through the assessment process. And that level of consultation continues through the mechanisms that Julie referred to, as well as an oversight group which we have created, which brings together professionals, SENCOs, head teachers, members of the SENSAP team, and the FFI team as well, every 2 weeks to discuss progress around the transition, as well as the broader content of the transformation programme. So I'm very confident that the level of engagement that we have with the education system around FFI is high and regular and responsive. Secondly, you asked a question about the number of children in Leeds in mainstream schools on FFI packages. It's obviously it changes from week to week, but it's approximately 5,000 children, to give you a sense of the scale. And so that is why it's really important that we look at how we transition from FFI to the EHCP process in a phased way.
Councillor Lamb, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that answer actually concerned me more rather than less. So I don't understand why being on an FFI package would prevent you from having a statutory assessment. And the concern I have is what happens to those children who perhaps don't meet the threshold for an EHCP but still have additional needs.
Julie, please.
Oh, thank you. A couple of things really. I think what I would like to highlight and stress is that when FFI was established within Leeds, it was really upheld, by the DFE and others, and actually in our last SEND inspection is really, really good practice. And I think the principle underpinning FFI was around being able to get support to children and families at the earliest opportunity. So really being able to identify where a child had additional needs and really bringing the team around that child within the educational setting to meet their needs. So the principle was absolutely a principle that none of us would disagree with. Again, when I came into post, and I think in my first 12 months, I met with every single family of schools in the city. So I think it was more than 200 education colleagues. And at every single one of those meetings, school leaders in the city were asking for a review of FFI. And what they were saying was that whilst when it had been initially established, it was fit for purpose, we're in a different place in 2022, 2023, 2024, following the pandemic, following the increase in demand. And they themselves, so our key stakeholders, our key partners in the city, were asking us to undertake a review of FFI. And that's exactly what we've done. So prior to Dan coming into post, we had already set up a number of task and finish groups with educational leaders within the city, because this has got to be, it's got to be a discussion. It's got to be partnership work. We've got to work in collaboration in terms of looking at an alternative, identifying an alternative. We've got to have a sense of ownership, collective ownership about that. And we've got to believe that it's going to be right for children and families. So we had began that work. And then since Dan has come in, as he has said, he's continued that work in collaboration with our key stakeholders in the city. That does not mean, whilst we're reviewing FFI, fundamental to that is our commitment to early intervention and prevention and ensuring, and this is where it is a multidisciplinary, multi-agency response, that the multi-agency system wraps around our schools to ensure that we are identifying where there might be emerging need, and then we're coming together to respond to that in as timely a way as possible. So the review of FFI and the changes that we will have do not and will not detract from the fundamental principle of early intervention and prevention. And those conversations are live, again, as I've said, with our key partners across the city in terms of how best we do that. You know, some of that is, I suppose, looking at, you know, the additional support that we as a local authority, but also our partners, thinking about health, thinking about others, can put into schools to support them to be able to identify the needs of children and families at, you know, the earliest opportunity.
Thank you. If I could just come in on the second part of the question that Councillor Lamb asked around children who don't meet the threshold for accessing provision and funding, therefore through an EHCP. The DSG, Dedicated Schools Grant, operational guidance and conditions of grant are very clear that if a child has, well, essentially SEND funding is in three parts, three elements. The funding that a child attracts by being in the school, which is the age-weighted pupil unit. Element 2, which is the notional funding for SEND within the school. And element 3, which is the EHCP top-up, which the council provides from the high needs block. And the guidance is very clear that if a child don't meet the threshold for an EHCP and therefore top up from the high needs block, then the school's notional budget is what is supposed to be used to provide a costed plan of provision. What Julie's talking about is that whilst that remains the operational guidance which we must follow nationally, there is real scope still to continue to be innovative, to continue to use our resource in a sensible way, which focuses on early intervention. But the way that we can do that is by stopping funding individual children with FFI packages. As soon as we do that, what we're saying is this child has needs above the threshold, and therefore we have to enter a statutory process. But there are other ways which we are seeking to retain through our transformation programme to allow us to fund schools and settings above a certain threshold in terms of the volume of children in the school to continue to meet some of that need, which would otherwise be pressure on the notional funding.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, do you want to come in again, please?
Yeah, it's a final comment rather than any more questions, but I don't feel assured by what I've just heard around the FFI aspect of this. I don't feel there is enough information in this paper about that aspect. I don't think there's been enough consultation or enough work done around FFI to satisfy myself that we should be approving that. The rest of the recommendations in this paper, I'm full square behind, long overdue. My suggestion would be that the FFI aspect is looked at separately with scrutiny's involvement, and that we get on a pace with the rest of the recommendations, but there's more work that needs to be done around that.
Thank you. Julie, would you like to come in on that comment from Councillor Lamb, please?
Yeah. Councillor Lamb, I'm sorry if the paper doesn't reflect the detail of the amount of work that has gone on and is going on. And I wonder whether perhaps as a starting point, I would be really happy with Dan to come and brief yourself and brief Councillor Cohen, whether that's together or whether that's separately, just to explain in more detail all of the work that has gone on, because there's a lot of work in terms of consultation, and I would hope that that would assure you. Obviously, if it doesn't, then we could have another conversation, but I'm very hopeful and confident that we will be able to give you that assurance.
Councillor Hayden, please.
I am, and I'm sure Julie and Dan would be very happy to work with scrutiny on the ongoing issues around FFI, and work to get that right with scrutiny. There's a lot of work has been gone on and is going on, and I'm very happy to work with scrutiny going forward to make sure that we get it right around FFI in particular, and the wider problems of EHCPs. You know, this is a review, and now the real work starts to get it right for children in the city and their parents and carers. So this is not the end of the journey, and that work will still be going on, and start the real work starting in earnest to get towards getting it right and getting us back on an even keel. And I'm very happy to work with scrutiny to make sure that the board and yourself, Councillor Cohen, have got that reassurance that we will get it right around children who have not yet or have not got an EHCP.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, I was just going to give my full support to the work, and I think it puts us in a much better position. I think we have been moving from a situation where we had something that worked well in the city, was assessed as being the right approach, to one where the national policy has changed, the national framework has changed, and we've had to adapt and move to a new position. And this puts us in the right place to do that. In terms of the resources, my understanding, and colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, there's no question here that we're putting less money into supporting people with young people with special educational needs in the city. If anything, the demand has gone up very, very significantly during the period that we're talking about. I think we all agree that there's an issue about how we collectively, cross-party, make that case for the overall levels of provision that are needed, which is happening right across the country, actually. But equally, we have to deal with the demand that's in the system. So it's how we adapt the way that we're working to make sure that the ECHP element, the legal statutory element, is right and is in line with the new policy. But it's not a sort of zero-sum game from my point of view. We are having to deal with increasing demand within the resources that we've got available in the city. And so I guess I'm trying to say that there isn't a specific reduction in overall resources. It's just the way that we're trying to use the resources we've got and lobby collectively for more resources for what is an area of increased demand.
Thanks, Tom. I think we're turning to the recommendations on this report. So before we do, I'd just like to thank Councillor Cohen for coming along today in the work of the scrutiny board on this. I'm sure, as well, Councillor Hayden and officers have said, this is scrutiny's involvement has been really crucial in taking this forward, and with many of the items that have come up. And as Councillor Hayden says, this report isn't the end of the process, and I'm sure I look forward to coming back to your board in the future about this issue. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations. Councillor Lamb, do you want to let us know what you're doing, please?
Yeah, well, my concern is around the FFI element. It's not a standalone recommendation. It should be. There should be more detail in the papers. I welcome the offer of briefings and more detail and assurance, but we're asked to make a decision now. It isn't responsible for me or anyone around this table to make that decision without that information, I would suggest. So I certainly would reserve my position. I really want to wholeheartedly support us getting on and delivering this work, but we should have the detail in front of us.
Okay, thank you. So we note your comments around the HCP work, and we note your comments in reserving your position. So I take it everybody else is happy with the recommendations. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cohen. And we'll move on to item 7, please, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. This paper outlines a review and proposed changes to the council's Little Owls nurseries. The paper proposes the closure of 3 of the 24 Little Owls settings and exploration of other options for the future delivery of a further 12 settings. The review has considered the effects of the availability of childcare, local needs such as deprivation and co-location with other services, and the sufficiency of provision for our children looked after and children with special educational needs and disabilities. The financial strain on the Children and Families Directorate has led to this difficult decision. In the context of many councils having already closed or outsourced childcare provision, chronic funding has devastated the early years sector nationally, and it is indicative of the staffing crisis associated with this, that it extends even to the settings like our Little Owls nurseries, where we are a real living wage employer. It is proposed that at least 9 Little Owl settings should continue to be delivered by the council in areas where they are most needed. They provide sufficient early years places for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and ensure there are places available for the most vulnerable children in the city. We understand the importance of accessible, high-quality childcare that is provided by Little Owls, and we understand the impact of these proposals will have on families and staff involved. We do not have the kind of shortages of childcare providers in Leeds that are quite extreme in some other parts of the country. Guaranteed places for children currently attending the 3 settings identified for closure are available at other local Little Owls nurseries, and there are also sufficient vacancies in settings for affected staff to be accommodated within the service. The withdrawal from the 3 identified settings has been postponed to August after considering the concerns of parents and carers, especially regarding children transitioning to school in September. And the time in this paper aims to reduce disruption for those children. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm sure everyone appreciates this has caused a great deal of concern for parents and families around the city. Not one that I've spoken to doesn't understand the financial position and doesn't understand the need to close the funding deficit. What they don't understand is why this is being done to them and not with them, which is not the spirit and principle that this council and children's services in particular are supposed to operate by, and that's how they feel. Whether you think that's the case, that's how they feel. There's been success in reducing the overspend from just shy of £2 million to £841,000 now, which is brilliant. So I'd like to understand how that has been achieved. I've got a number of questions again. I'd like to go one by one. The second one at this point, sorry. Okay. Yeah, it's a very important issue to a lot of people, and they want these questions answered because they've asked them and they haven't been answered. So it's left to me to ask them on their behalf. So in the my understanding is the council says that the charges for a little hour setting is £55 a day, if I've got that right, if someone can confirm, and that's pitched at a median range, which would suggest the average cost in the city is between £48 and £63. I've not found anyone who can find childcare in this city for £48. So can you tell me which settings provide childcare for £48 a day, please?
I'll bring in Phil, but I would say there's actually quite a larger range than that, but that it was pitched somewhere in the middle. But I'll bring Phil to clarify on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hayden and Councillor Lamb. I take the first point really about engagement with parents and carers. We have sought to engage with parents and carers. We've held a number of engagement sessions, one at each of the nurseries that is subject to a potential change, had a comprehensive frequently asked questions, website, freedom of information requests, email. So there has been an awful lot of engagement with parents and carers. I just think it's helpful if I start from that. In relation to the second point about cost, it's quite difficult for us to accurately gather costs from a range of private sector operators. Quite often they aren't keen on sharing those with us. To be honest, they're sometimes not keen with sharing them at a headline level with parents, and they'd like parents to come in to see the facility, to see what it gets, and then they have a conversation about cost later. But what we have done is we've done some dip sampling of that, and we are assured that the numbers that we've presented are the correct numbers. We would acknowledge, however, that quite often individual nursery operators will have a base price, which is their base headline price, but then there's a series of additions, and some of those additions might be nappies, might be food, might be sunscreen, might be a whole range of things. So when you add those costs in, then it is quite possible that the overall cost of provision is significantly higher than the cost of our provision. We, of course, though, are not operating in a commercial setting. We are still seeking to deliver little hour settings on a benefit to individual children basis. So therefore our price should always reflect that to a certain extent.
Julie, please.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Lamb, I just wanted to come back on the point that you raised about the savings that had been able to be realised. And essentially, they were realised as a consequence of amalgamation that we undertook previously in relation to a number of our nurseries. So by amalgamating those nurseries, what we were able to do was to utilise our resource, especially in relation to staffing, to best effect, which has then enabled us to take more children in those nurseries. So again, in the paper, when we talk about the 12 settings where we would want to take the market sounding exercise and also explore further opportunities for amalgamation, you know, what we have got is examples where we have been able to do that previously. We've done it successfully and we've made those savings.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Okay, well, I would just restate that the families that I've spoken to don't feel they've been consulted with and engaged with in detail. They think they've been consulted at and engaged at and done to. But you have a different view. So my next question is, what other options have been explored? Because what I can tell you is the families really value the service provided by Little Owls, and I think I'm sure others will join me in thanking and congratulating the staff at all of the settings that we operate for the work that they do, because they are highly valued and people are actively choosing this provision over the private sector because they see it as being better and more valuable for their children. So what the families don't understand is what other options have been explored. So they fear with the closure of these settings, the cost to them are going to go up significantly by tens of pounds a day. Can you tell us how much you would need to increase the charge in order to close the deficit?
Hey, Councillor Hayden and then Julie, please.
I just want to reiterate that every family has been offered a place at a Little Owls setting for their child, and that all staff will remain working in a Little Owls nursery. It just won't be the one that they currently work at. And been working with the staff and with the children and families to make sure that a child's key worker in many cases will be able to move to another Little Owls setting with that child. And that's incredibly important at this stage in a child's life, that they have that consistency of staffing. So first thing first, that every child is offered a place at a Little Owls nursery setting.
I'll bring in Julie. No, hang on. I'll bring in Julie and I'll come back
on
to
that
Alan.
specific point.
I'll bring in Julie and I'll come back to you, Alan. I can have all the time in the world. Julie, please.
Oh, thank you. To be honest with you, it was just to build on the point that Councillor Hayden has just made, because that's when we were, looking at the closure of the 3 sites, which is, has been proposed. Overall, we have 1,800 children in the city who are on the roll of our Little Owls settings. In relation to the 3 sites proposed for closure, there are 94 children who would be impacted. Currently, 82 of the parents' carers, 82 of those children have been offered and have accepted places at other Little Owls settings. So that's 82 out of 94. 8 children, their parents and carers have not specified their preference, but if their preference is for Little Owls, then we do have capacity and that can be met. And 4 children, their parents and carers have opted to go to other childcare providers. So I just want to give that assurance that, in relation to the children who are impacted, all of them could have had a place in an alternative Little Owl settings, which are judged as good or outstanding.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, I can hear the parents shouting at the screen if they're watching at home that in many cases, I'm sure it isn't practical to go to another setting in a different part of the city that's not it just isn't realistic for them to be able to do that and go on to work and so on. I know that nobody's answered the question yet about what alternatives have been explored to close this deficit. So Phil touched on one example, that we don't charge for things that other people charge for. Is that something that's been explored? And specifically, what increase would you need to make to the daily rate to close the deficit?
Councillor Hayden and then Phil, please.
In terms of in terms of the little owls that are closing, there are other little owls within a mile of the one that is closing. In fact, there's two in Seacroft that they're in a kind of triangle at the moment, and there's two others that are within a mile of the one that is closing. Actually, some parents have opted for little owls near to where they work. So it's not always, and I know over the years, lots of parents who have done that, including family of mine, that have actually opted for nurseries near where they work rather than near where they live, because it's more practical to take the child to the nursery and then go to work. And actually during the day, you are near that, you are geographically near your child when you're working. But I'll bring Phil in on the alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden and Councillor Lamb. I authored the paper. I'm obviously aware of the comments that have come in, and I've reviewed that paper. And with hindsight, I could have actually been a lot. I could have provided some more information about viable alternatives, and I'll happily accept that that is something that I could have done. I think the key point for me on that point, Councillor Lamb, is that the Directorate is bringing forward these proposals on the basis of its dire financial situation and the dire financial challenges that it faces. You will know, and there's a paper on the Executive Board agenda later on that sets out what last year's outturn was, and we have to view the context of the Directorate's decision-making against that financial construct. It's also, I think, helpful for me just to reiterate that whilst there's been a reduction in the overspend, it is still a net budget spend for the council of approximately £2 million on little owls. So this isn't about them breaking even. This is about bringing the service as close to possible to the budget that councillors have agreed for the service. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. What I'd then say is, in terms of what we've tried to do previously, and it builds up on the point that Julie's made about we have amalgamated settings previously. We've looked at settings, we've looked at their financial viability, and we've made some changes to them. We've also very much reduced our staffing structures. We've remodeled our staffing structures. We've particularly reduced the level of management overhead that exists at Little Owls. We've worked with our internal service providers in terms of facilities management and cleaning and catering to try to get them to be as productive and effective as possible. We've reduced supernumerary staff to make sure that we're then able to count them in the child to staffing ratios. And also what we do have to get to is to get to that maximum efficiency of children at particular settings where we can then staff them. We have to be guided by statutory arrangements in terms of the number of staff to number of children. And then I think we then need to overlay the complexity of the model that we've looked at for Little Owl settings that very clearly is said that the council needs to reflect that we have a higher number of children with special education needs and disabilities at our settings because they are not generally well provided for in the private sector. That then means that we have to have additional staff to meet those costs, and then that increases the cost of that provision. I haven't got the detail in terms of what it would be in terms of it being, you know, if we increase by X, we'd get that down. And I haven't got that to hand. What I think, though, is that, as Tom said to the last item, this isn't a zero-sum game. This isn't about us just increasing fees and charges to a point that the private sector is charging and we increasing it to a level that we cover all our costs. This is about seeking to take that balanced approach where the council seeks to understand why is it delivering these facilities, where's the value that we are providing, particularly in relation to children with need, and how are we seeking to do that? And the key aspect of that, I think, is about having a sustainable base of nurseries that we provide into the future that absolutely consider our legal duty. Our legal obligation is to ensure that there is sufficient provision of nursery provision in the city for parents and carers who are working or in full-time education. It isn't for us to provide that provision directly, but we can choose to do so. And the council can determine upon what basis it chooses to do that. So if the council decides that we should move to a position of full cost recovery, We could do that. We could look at increasing costs. But at the moment, what we're suggesting to council and to executive board is, with the changes that we're suggesting, that we will be able to get it down to the budget that the council has approved for this function. That's not to say that we might not be back in terms of what other opportunities might exist in terms of fees and income and how we look at that. But that's not the decision we're looking at today, because we're seeking to bring it back to the council's budgeted position that members have agreed.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I absolutely support getting back into the budgeted position. That's absolutely what we should be doing. My point, and the point of families, and over 500 families whose view is not the same as yours, Councillor Hayden, I have to say. I don't know if you've met them or taken the time to meet them, but they would express a very different view of the world to what you've described. One of the points they have made very strongly to me is they don't see and understand where the council have looked at alternatives. And I would stress again, they really value this provision. They feel, and this is their view, not mine, that many of them will be forced to leave work as a result of this decision. I would like to understand what the impact assessments have been beyond trying to get the council's budget under control. What's the impact on the wider economy of people's ability to go to work?
Phil, please.
At the risk of repeating myself, I think the methodology that we've applied in terms of looking at this starts with our legal obligation, the duty of sufficiency. So we've started from that perspective. What we've then done is we've looked at where that provision exists currently in child placement areas, which are broken down across the entire city. We then overlaid that in relation to the number of children who are open to social care in those placement areas, the number of children with special education needs and disabilities. We then looked at that in terms of an element of cost, and what's the cost of that provision and its financial modelling, and all that come together gets us to the position that we've presented back to members today, that says there are three broad groupings: those where we think there is the potential for a withdrawal, those where we think that there are other options in terms of meeting our sufficiency duty, and there are those where we actually believe the council should continue to provide them. And that has been the basis of the work that has been done, that has been done with very robust in terms of the methodology, looking at all those pieces of data and bringing them all together to try to get to a balanced position that we can present to members that isn't just reflecting a single perspective in terms of what should the council be doing or not be doing in relation to its future provision.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hayden and Julie, and then I think we'll turn to the recommendations.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose I just wanted to reiterate, I just wanted to say that we are really, really aware of how emotive this is for parents and for carers. I have had children, I've got grandchildren, I know the importance and the significance of childcare for families in the city. But I think the fact that in terms of the three proposed closures, that 90 out of the 94 children who are impacted are able and have been offered an alternative little else high quality setting that's been judged good or outstanding is really reassuring. And in terms of the local authority's duty and sufficiency duty, it's clear that there is the sufficiency required in our existing settings. The other thing really, I suppose, is just to, to say, and I think it was the point that Councillor Hayden made earlier, that what we've also done, and we've really thought about this because we, as I've said, we're aware of how emotive it is, but down to the detail of, where those children have been offered and where they have accepted alternative settings, that we're really doing everything we can, even to the extent of looking to see where we can match those children with their existing key workers in their existing nursery, so that those key workers can follow those children to their new settings. But I suppose really it's Phil's point. It would be totally remiss of us as public servants in in the position that we are financially, for us not to be fulfilling our statutory duty in the most efficient way that we possibly can, having due regard to the needs of children and the experiences of the children. And as I've said, 90 of the 94 children, well, all 94 could have accepted a place at our existing Little L's settings. We're fulfilling our sufficiency duty. We're providing those children with alternatives within close proximity to the previous nursery, and again, high quality in terms of settings that are good or outstanding.
Thank you. Councillor Hayden, please.
Just to reiterate that it's not 500 families, it's 94 children and their families and carers that are affected. They've all been offered a place in a Little Owls nursery in our good and outstanding provision. I'm not going to say much more as to why, because we are in the pre-election period, that we find ourselves in a situation where we would not want to be. But I have been in this role for less than 4 weeks. So yes, it's not that I haven't taken the time, it's just that I haven't had the time in that period to meet with all the families, of which there are 94 children. And that doesn't necessarily correspond to 94 families, and it certainly doesn't correspond to 500 families that are, it's 94 children that are affected by this decision today, a decision that none of us on this side of the table would want to take ordinarily.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a final comment before the recommendations. So, you're not taking into account of the siblings of children when you're referring to the 94. You're not taking into account their friends and neighbours and friendship groups that won't have the opportunity to go to a setting. And there are more than 500 families in this city who are deeply concerned, upset and worried at the loss of these provisions and the other changes that are being made. That's what I'm trying and hoping someone would acknowledge. My point is, I don't think you do need to do this to save the money. I think there are alternative ways that these settings, which are highly valued by those families, could be saved and deal with the budget situation at the same time. I think if you did it with parents rather than doing it to them, that could be achieved. It could be achieved relatively quickly and straightforwardly. We don't have the options set out in front of us. And again, I feel in a position that absolutely I cannot support what's proposed here. I don't think anyone responsible around the table should do so.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. So we've noted your position on the recommendations on page 60. Take it everybody else is happy with those. That's great. Thank you. We'll move on to item 8, please.
Thank you, Leader. This report sets out how the council will meet its statutory duty to ensure sufficiency of placements to meet the needs of children looked after. Priorities being given to increasing Leeds' own provision of family-based placements as well as residential homes in order to keep children in Leeds. Where it is safe and appropriate, children do best when they're in the city, close to their families, friends, and schools and support networks. Having a strong sufficiency strategy is key to our efforts to address the challenge around rising numbers of children looked after and associated pressures from private residential costs, which are being seen in Leeds as well as regionally and nationally. Importantly, the report highlights the voices of children and young people with lived experience and our role as corporate parents in making sure we deliver on the promises we have made to them to help them thrive and succeed. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Lamb?
Yes, thank you. We're getting through some serious things today. As we know, sorry?
Same as we always do, Executive Board, Councillor Lamb.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, this is another big issue around children looked after. happens to be one of the biggest budget pressures for the council as well. I welcome anything that we're doing to try and improve outcomes for looked after children, and to try and get the costs under control in this area. So the questions I have really are around pace. I know there's a lot of senior officers working on this issue. There's not particularly anything new in this paper. It's kind of repackaging what we've already been doing. It's really, what reassurance can you give us about being able to deliver the changes that are needed at the pace they are needed?
Julie, please.
Thank you, Leader. As you've said, Councillor Lamb, you know, this is an area of significant pressure for every single local authority across the country. We know that we have demand and demography pressures. You know, we know that we have an increased cohort of adolescents within the city. We know that those adolescents are in the main living in the areas of highest deprivation in the city. And we know the correlation between poverty and child abuse and neglect. Really, you know, it is an ambitious sufficiency strategy. You know, what we ultimately want is for Leeds children to be in Leeds, connected to kin, connected to family, connected to the schools and the local communities. We do have, as I've mentioned in one of the previous papers, an absolute cross-council approach to this. As I've said previously, we have a delivery board that I chair. We have a number of work streams that report into that delivery board. We have identified additional resource, you know, within children and families, so people that have got real expertise in this area to drive the transformation that we need, and to give us the pace that we need. There are things which are out with our control. So as an example, you know, we want to increase significantly the level of our in-house residential small group home provision, but there are a number of external, what would you say, barriers in some ways, you know. So as an example, the time that it takes to register a children's home, the time that it takes for a manager to go through registration requirements with Ofsted, you know, there's a number of things that are out with our control. The things that are within our control, we absolutely have that oversight and that scrutiny, and we are putting all of our resource behind it. I think for me, though, really, you know, this sets out the ambition, you know, the ambition that we've got in the directorate, the ambition that we've got in the local authority, the ambition that we've got in the partnership for our children, you know, that real corporate parenting responsibility, you know, and actually, you know, there's some real exciting, inspirational work that we're going to be driving. So again, I was out last week. I visited one of our small group living homes. I met the young person who is currently living there. He, you know, he was previously had a number of different placements, you know, had a number of different missing episodes. You know, he's back in Leeds. He's in a small group living home. It felt warm. You know, Joshua McAllister talks about stable homes built on love. It felt like a stable home. You know, the staff felt nurturing, they felt warm, and that young person is absolutely thriving. You know, we're wanting to look at our homes for children with complex needs. We're wanting to look actually, you know, at how do we support parents, you know, with young children who might be in proceedings and who are at risk of having those children accommodated. You know, what is our offer in the city for parent and child placements, emergency accommodation. You know, we've talked about the fact that we have, you know, adolescents within the city who actually, if they just had that time out, if they could have some time away from family, where we could work with the family using our family group conferencing service, you know, actually how that could enable families to stay together. So there's a detailed, implementation plan which sits underneath the sufficiency strategy. I think we've referenced previously at Executive Board that I meet with the Deputy Leader of the Council, with the Lead Member for Children and Families, with the Chief Finance Officer and other corporate colleagues after every Executive Board, where we have that member oversight scrutiny meeting, really scrutinising us and challenging us on getting the pace, that we all know that we need. So where there's things that are within our gift, we are absolutely doing our best to get that pace and that urgency. I've just come this morning from an extended leadership meeting where we had managers right across the directorate, where we were talking about this sufficiency strategy, but talking about the need for that whole system change, and again, when I talk about ambition, it's not just about opening, developing, establishing more children's homes. It's what's our model, what's our practice framework for those homes? How are we going to ensure that those children get the best quality service, the service that we would want for our own? And that's got to be about a multidisciplinary team, speech and language, health, our police colleagues. Education is key. We know that education is a huge factor in terms of children being able to stay at home or children being able to stay in a family setting. So for me, this is a really, as it should be, ambitious strategy, which not only seeks to respond to the financial challenges that we've got, but ultimately seeks to deliver really fantastic outcomes for children and keep them in Leeds where we want them to be.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And this is one I think we all desperately want you to succeed on, because that means we can spend more resource preventing children needing to be looked after in the first place, instead of looking after them once things have gone so badly wrong. So, yeah, willing you on this one, on this paper. I support the recommendations. Just hope we can do it at sufficient pace. That's the key.
Thank you. Thank you for support, Councillor Lamb. I'm going to, don't see any more comments on this one, so I am going to turn to the recommendations, and I take it everybody is happy with those recommendations. Great. Thank you. We'll move on to item 9, please, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. So this is an update report on joint targeted area inspection on serious youth violence in Leeds. The report provides an overview and outcomes of a 3-week joint targeted area inspection of the multi-agency partnership response of the local authority, police and health services to children at risk of and affected by serious youth violence. It was a rigorous inspection carried out in March and led by Ofsted, with a total of 12 inspectors, also from Care Quality Commission, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, and His Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation. The inspection is in the context of the government's serious youth violence strategy introduced in April 2023, which focuses on partnership working. It is fantastic that the inspectors noticed that the strength of the multi-agency relationships in Leeds, and that children benefit from effective multi-agency responses to serious youth violence and criminal exploitation. This inspector offers assurance of good practice in the city, but we are not complacent, and we know that there's still more to be done, and an action plan is underway to further address issues around serious youth violence. I'd like to thank everyone involved in this work. It's incredibly difficult and heartbreaking work at times, and I want to thank everyone involved in it across the council and our partners in the police, in the health service and in probation, for the massive difference they continue to make in the lives of our children, young people and their families, and indeed the whole every community in Leeds. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, yeah, welcome the report, and overall it's a positive outcome. One of the most pleasing things for me to read, and we discussed that when I met the 3 partners in the executive on earlier this week. A couple of years ago, I think we had some serious concerns about the health of that multi-agency relationship. And I was happy to feed back to them and to do it publicly today that I can recognise that that's improved dramatically over the last 2 years, and is having an impact. And that's really pleasing to see, and it's captured in the report. The challenge always with this agenda is whenever anything's good, it will never be good enough. There's always more to do. So what I'm looking for really today is just some two things. One, just if someone could talk us through what we're doing, what the action plan is for the 3 areas identified for improvements. And also the response has to go back by the 23rd of August. I would be keen to know what democratic oversight there'll be of that response. Will it come back to this executive board? Will it go to scrutiny? What is the plan to share that response to make sure that we can then track the actions and follow them through?
Thank you. Who wants to pick those questions up? Julie, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Lamb. As Councillor Hayden has said, this is one of the most complex areas of our work. We shared as a partnership with the inspectors, how dynamic this work is, so just, even the language, us being au fait and familiarised with the language that children and young people are using, who are at risk of or involved in serious youth violence. This is work where we have had to, and I'm sure, regrettably, we will have to do again, move children out of Leeds in order to save their lives. And I can't put it more more bluntly than that. So it's a really high risk area of our work. So we really welcomed the report and its findings in terms of the effectiveness of the partnership, the tenacity and commitment of frontline practitioners, and that culture around restorative practice and working with. The other thing I would just sort of highlight really is innovation. We talked earlier in terms of the sufficiency strategy about having ambition, and constantly, just as you've said, Councillor Lamb, constantly pushing ourselves in terms of improving our practice. And what I thought, what I found really pleasing was the reference in the report to the risk outside the home pathway, which is a new pathway which we developed in Leeds. We worked with Professor Carleen Furman, who is a leading academic in terms of risk outside the home. So we're taking a different approach in Leeds, and fundamental to that approach is recognising that parents and carers are protective factors in this area of work, that they are our key partners. So I suppose I just wanted to highlight that, we are not about standing still. We're constantly about innovation, about, looking externally, other local authorities that we can learn with, partnerships with academics, as I've just explained. In terms of the plan that's got to be developed in response to the key findings, it is the local authority's responsibility to lead on that plan. So we're in the process at the moment of working with our key partners to formulate that plan. Obviously, it's not, whilst the local authority's got a lead, there are recommendations and findings in the document for single agencies, but also for the partnership. So it's quite right, and it would be expected that we're working in collaboration with our key partners on that. Farah, as Deputy Director of Children's Social Care, will be meeting with that group of partners in a few weeks' time, just to review the plan. We don't have to have the plan completed until the end of August, as you've said, Councillor Lamb. It's got to go to Ofsted by the 23rd of August. I'm very happy to share that plan once we do have it completed with Councillor Cohen as Chair of Scrutiny, and to discuss what oversight there might be. But as of yet, we haven't got the plan completed, because it does require absolute collaboration with our key partners. Thank you.
Yes, just to add to that in relation to the partnership, as Councillor Lamb highlighted, and the multi-agency response, it's an expectation that the Leeds Safeguarding Partnership have oversight of that plan to ensure that actions, so that the oversight of implementation of that plan. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Julie, please.
Sorry, that was really helpful input from Farah there, because she's quite right that in terms of the LSCP exec having responsibility to oversee the implementation of the plan. The LSCP exec does bring an annual report to scrutiny to executive board, and I would expect that the plan and the progress in terms of its implementation would be included in that report. So there would be an opportunity for scrutiny and exec board obviously to review that and comment.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think that approach is consistent with how we'd normally deal with assessments and action plans back. So they wouldn't normally need to be approved through executive board. I just wanted to add to just the point about follow up and the actions that are needed. I think when you read the report, I mean, it is really, testament to the quality of the practice and professionalism of the individuals concerned at the front line. The cohort of young people that they're dealing with are, leading incredibly challenging lives at times and have incredible challenges themselves. And I think the support that the team in Leeds provides it's fantastic to read it back. And the good thing for me is that it's across the council. So the teams in children's services, the teams in James's department, the other people involved in and outside the council, the cabinet, responsibility that's taken jointly that's actually over a number of years we've really has really made the difference. The things that I think we need to improve on are often linked to the wider pressures in the system about assessments, CAMS assessments, about the more systemic follow-up of bringing together of information once individual actions have been taken. I think it's quite not surprising to me as well that the sort of pressure to almost fill in the forms and do the proper audit trail after the actions happened is what we've got to improve on. But the team are on with that, and we'll certainly make sure that happens. But just a big thank you to me, and great to see Catch mentioned as well as an example of very good practice for anyone who's been there. That would be what they'd feed back.
Thanks, Tom. No other comments. I'll turn to the recommendations on page 151, and I take it everybody is happy with those recommendations. That's great, thank you. And we're now on to item 10, please, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Leader. This paper seeks Executive Board approval to go out to consultation and propose changes to transport assistance for post-16 learners with special educational needs and disabilities. If approved, the intention is for the consultation to launch on Monday, June the 24th, to run for 4 weeks until July the 21st, with a paper going to Executive Board in October for consideration. While the Council is statutorily obliged to make free of charge home to school travel arrangements for eligible children of compulsory school age, there is no similar obligation on the local authority to provide transport for post-16 learners. However, the Council currently provides substantial discretionary assistance for post-16 learners with SEND. Rising demand and rising costs have seen this assistance cost approximately 4 to 4.5 million for the 23-24 academic year, with the number of learners doubling since 2015. Our aim would be to promote independence, be that through independent travel training or another transport solution. And a lot of that work goes on already with people both at with SEND, both in statutory school age and beyond. Although, of course, we have to consider the financial challenge facing the Council. It's important to know that any changes will be phased in from September 2025 for new applications, and we are asking to consult on post-16 SEND provision only. The consultation will include young people, their families, partners and stakeholders across the city, with EDI monitoring constantly updated. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Lamb?
Thank you, Chair. Before we get to the principle of what we're doing, I just want to set out, and I'd be grateful for a response, that why on earth this is exempt from calling. So taking away the opportunity for elected members to have proper oversight of this because of the urgency of it is the justification. This hasn't come as a surprise or crept up on us over a short period of time. This is something that we've known about for a long time. So can someone explain to me why we're in a position where we're taking away that democratic right of people's elected representatives to challenge this decision?
Councillor Hayden, please.
This paper asks for permission to consult. It has to be done within school term time, quite rightly, and therefore that's the urgency. The paper that will come in October will be fully cognizant of calling and will be open to calling, and that's on the base in the consultation. So this is just because it's just for permission to consult, and then once we have the consultation, that paper in October will be fully available for calling by elected members.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Lampley.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, that won't do at all. The whole point is that right has been taken away because the decision needs to be taken urgently and the consultation needs to be taken urgently. Why has it not been brought forward sooner? Why wait till now at a point where you have to say, no, you can't call it in? It's an important democratic principle. Is it due to someone's incompetence in not bringing it forward, or is it a deliberate decision to wait until it couldn't be called in?
Julie, please.
I'll come in first, Councillor Lamb, and then Phil might want to come in after me. Absolutely not. I think, as is reflected by the number of papers on today's executive board for the Children and Families Directorate, I think it's clear the level of transformation that we've got underway in the directorate. And we have had a project team who really were reviewing our transport policy, and we're comparing that really with our comparators in terms of approaches that are taken elsewhere. So it absolutely is about capacity. It is about, the earliest opportunity that we could bring this here was today, based on the fact that there's as I've already said, a breadth of other transformation work, which is all priority. It's all requires pace and urgency. And we weren't in a position, we didn't have the capacity or the resource to bring it prior to today. But as Councillor Hayden has said, this is about a proposal to consult. There will be active consultation and then a real opportunity to go through due process and call in when we come back to the October board.
Thank you. And I would just stress on this point as well, the timeline set out here. So we are asking to consult during school term time, which is a requirement. We'll be coming back to the October Executive Board, and to reiterate what Councillor Hayden said, that paper will be open for call-in, and then it'll be policy to be implemented if there are changes proposed in September 2025. So in terms of the openness and the call-in decision, there is clearly plenty of time in that one, but we do need to get this consultation done during school term time, which is why we are being asked as an exec board to take that decision to open consultation today.
Okay to come back?
Yeah, of course, Councillor Lamb.
Thank you. So, well, I'm not happy with that at all. What we don't have the opportunity to do is properly scrutinise or challenge the scope of the consultation, and the scope of the consultation very often determines the outcome. So I don't think it's acceptable, but you've already made a decision. So on that basis alone, I won't be supporting this paper. Coming to the principle, I've got a long memory and been around a long time now, and I was thinking back, I think, to 2011, 2012, when we first introduced independent travel training into the council, which was a very positive step, actually. And it has the happy coincidence of being better for young people because it allows them to live an independent life and gives them the opportunity to do that where it's appropriate for them. And it saves the council money at the same time. At that point in time, I suggested and was knocked down repeatedly in budget amendments that we should do more of it and go faster, and was repeatedly told that no, we shouldn't. We should take our time and go carefully on it. I think we should have done more then. The problem I have with this paper is we're going the wrong way around. We're not basing it on the needs of children and young people. We're basing it on the need to save money, which I understand. And if you do this right, it will save a significant amount of money. But the starting point, and why I think the consultation is wrong, is it should be about needs first. And we should be doing the right thing for each individual child and young person to make sure that they can live the most fulfilling life possible, that they can live independently if that's appropriate for them, and that we then make it the best value to the taxpayer. I don't feel the approach outlined here is doing any of those things.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Dan, please.
Thank you, Leader. Just to confirm that certainly since I've arrived, it's my understanding that we have invested significantly in scaling up the activity around independent travel training, as Councillor Lamb has pointed out. So it's a good thing, and we already are growing the number of children accessing that in the city.
Thank you, Dan. Does anybody else want to come in on this paper? No, I can't see anybody else wants to come in. So I turn to the recommendations. We've heard Councillor Lamb is reserving his position. I take it everybody else is happy with those recommendations. That's great. Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Thank you to Children's Services Officers. As we move on to the papers, and the first one is under my portfolio, which is a brief paper, but one I know means a lot to people, which is setting out just at this stage our approach as a council to commemorate the life of Rob Burrow, which we were all. I know everybody was very touched by the news of his death earlier this month on the 2nd of June. We made Rob and Kevin Sinfield Freedom of the City about 18 months ago, recognising their contribution to life in the city, both on the pitch at Headingley and also in terms of raising money and raising awareness of MND. The purpose of this paper today is to note their contribution to the city, reflect on the fact that the outpouring of grief that was seen at a number of places around the city through people leaving tributes, particularly at Headingley Stadium, but also other places around the city, needs recognising. And to say as a council, we will, myself, I know Tom has, I know Councillor Pryor has been very involved in this as well, has had lots of people coming to us asking what we'll do as a council as this sets out. We will over the weeks and months ahead work with Rob's family, with the Rhinos around what is appropriate and fitting memorial. Is it something I know is so important to people in the city, and at this stage it's right that we support what the family wishes are and work with the rugby club and the MND charities on that as well. So it's in some ways it's a very moving paper, but it's also helps us commit to moving forward in the weeks and months ahead. So those are my words of introduction. I'll see if anybody else on the board wishes to comment. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to echo your comments, to send deep condolences to Rob and his family and everybody that's been affected by his sad death. I can't pretend, and I won't pretend to be a rugby league fan. I'm more the other code, but it's kind of the lasting tribute and legacy is that he transcends his sport. He transcends sport fully, and the impact he's had on so many people who knew absolutely nothing about his sporting legacy is a real testament to the way he bravely dealt with what life threw at him and still made the best of every day that he had. I think it's absolutely right. We should totally do whatever we can to commemorate, honour and continue the work that he started to try and tackle this dreadful disease, absolutely taking into account the wishes of his family, the rugby club, but acknowledging that all of our citizens, I think, look to us to say, what are we going to do as a city on their behalf to pay not just a proper tribute, but to make sure that the work and his legacy lives on, because I think we could all learn a great deal from the way he lived his life and made the best of it. Yeah, so totally support what you've put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Does anybody else on the board want to comment? Tom, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to fully support all the comments that have been made, and the day after Rob died, he had insisted that his family go up to Seacroft to do the earth cutting for the M&D centre that's been built up there, and it was very privileged to be there and meet his mum and dad and his sisters and Kevin as well, and having many of us have met Lindsay and the kids as well. I mean, the family themselves epitomise everything about the city. You can see where Rob got his talent and, you know, commitment and compassion from his family, and it's we talked then about the impact that the marathon has had already, and, you know, as a legacy going forward for that to, you know, to continue to raise money in the way that it's been so successful in doing so far, and also how important M&D and a cure for M&D was for Rob, and yeah, so just to completely support, you know, what's been said, and I think the family, from the conversations that we've had with the family already, it's very much in line with, you know, what the paper's saying, and something that we really want to make sure happens in the city in a way that truly commemorates the massive impact that Rob made on and off the pitch.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to just look to the recommendations, and I take it from the comments made, everybody's happy with those recommendations. Thank you, everybody. We now move on to Councillor Cooper's papers and item 12, please.
Thank you, Leader. And moving on to the finances of the council. The first of my papers is the outturn position for what was an extremely challenging year for us as a council financially last year. So I am pleased to report that we were able to bring about a balanced position at the end of the year through using use of reserves and one-off measures, really. So mainly to say some part of the Merrion House receipt, and also for utilising the 17.7 million that we managed to get returned as a refund from Wicker as well. Without which would have created a whole other problem for us in the year. So we did balance to also help us balance throughout the year. We were relying on directorates delivering the savings that we set out the year before in the budget previously. And I'm really pleased that we managed to achieve 77% of those savings under, as I've said, an extremely challenging year for directorates, with increased demand and increased pressures coming through at the same time as they were trying to make these efficiency savings as well. So I want to thank all directorates, all teams within those directorates who were able to achieve those savings in, like I've said, extremely challenging times. The report does go into a great deal of detail about the year, where overspends were, where some underspends were. Also asks us around capital injections that need to be made, and they're in the recommendations as well for executive board members. So I'll leave it there for now, Chair, given we're in pre-election period.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll follow suit, Councillor Cooper, don't worry. So I just want a couple of brief questions. One on the adults budget, which I know was pretty much balanced for the year. So well done. I note it required the use of just over £10 million of reserves, and that the vast majority of your budget action plans were delivered. So the question's in two parts. So what impact does that have on adults and health reserves now? And the second point, which comes on to children and families, what learning is there for us? Given adults and health is also a demand-led service, you're managing to deliver on your budget and savings. So what is it that you're doing, and what's the learning for children's to take from that?
Caroline, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, in terms of we got into that position around the need to use £10 million of reserves because the point at which the budgets were set in previous financial year for the year 24-25, we saw quite unprecedented increases in demand for services, particularly pressures for older adults at the time requiring long-term residential nursing provision or home care packages and increased size of packages. And those weren't budgeted for when the budgets were set for the financial year. Fortunately, the good news is that we are now seeing a stabilisation of that demand pressure in older adult services since January. So it's begun to come down a little bit. That's not the same situation for working age adults. So we are still seeing quite increased pressures around complex packages of support, supported living, residential and nursing provision for people of working age adults. So yes, we've had to utilise our reserve, which means that we're in a very difficult starting position because our commitments are somewhat overspent in terms of our budget allocation. But as you've indicated, we are already on to developing action plans which will hopefully help us to come back to a balanced position. It is very, very challenging at the moment, but we know that we can work towards reviewing people who are receiving care and support, and therefore looking at opportunities for savings through that means, but also working with our providers around the fees that they charge. We, along with Children's Services, have recently bought a tool called Care Cubed, which helps us to identify through open book accounting the actual costs that providers are saying it takes to deliver services. So we hope that a range of those sorts of approaches, together with looking at all opportunities to generate income, including client income and income from other partners such as our NHS partners, we hope that we will be back on the road to recovery.
Thank you. Julie, please.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose I'd start really by saying that whilst both, adults and health, children and families are social care services, they are very, very, very different in terms of the makeup and the demand on those services. We've talked already at Exec Board this afternoon about, the acknowledged national position that we're in around children's social care, and how clearly that was set out in the Josh McAllister review, and to use his terminology, not mine, the fact that it is a broken system. The position that we are in terms of external residential placements and the costs of those, and the increasing costs of those, and the profit, which is going into the private sector. So that's, they are things that have been recognised nationally that are out with our control. We've also talked today around the demands in relation to children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, and the you know, the domino effect there in terms of transport costs for those children where they do have an EHCP plan and where transport is part of that plan. So Caroline and I are colleagues. You know, we meet regularly, and I think we're both very aware of the differences in terms of our services. We're also all very aware that there are some similarities and there are some commonalities. We're doing a lot of joint work. We have re-established a joint commissioning board. We now have a strategic commissioning board, which Councillor Cooper chairs, to do exactly what you've referenced, Councillor Lamb, which is as you would expect, you know, where there's learning for children and families. Absolutely, you know, in particular, we're looking at transitions as an example, in terms of some of those packages of care, you know, for children who we know are going to have to make a transition into adult services. As I mentioned in the JTI, you know, fundamental to the improvement journey in children and families in Leeds has been recognising that we can always learn. We can learn corporately, we can learn internally, we can learn from our external partners. And, you know, not only are we open to that, we are proactively determined to engage with that where we can. And that's exactly what we're doing, and we're learning together.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yeah, if I can just add to some of what Caroline and Julia have just said in terms of the work that's ongoing, you know, between both directorates. We've got a cross-council approach in terms of looking at the finances of the council, as you would imagine, and all directorates are involved in that. And also all open to any suggestion from other areas of the council where if there is examples of really good kind of practice going on, if that can be shared across the council, that's happening. So I just want to give you some reassurance around that. Julie stated the specifics of the various boards that are meeting now, and Julie mentioned earlier about the oversight board that takes place after executive board as well. That where we do challenge in terms of what spend children's are looking at within you know, the next month, the next few months, next year. And so on, and also look to mitigate what that spend might well be. I have to say that children's have faced unprecedented pressure in terms of the finances with their children who looked after, particularly around the external placements. And we know I think we've spoke about it at every single executive board this year, haven't we? You know, that actually there's a private market out there that are profiteering on the backs of you know, children, vulnerable children and vulnerable families, in terms of their you know, charging policies and the way they conduct their businesses in a really competitive market, I have to say. Makes it extremely difficult, but that is the biggest part of the overspend within children's, and a lot of that is out of their control because it's whatever the demands are in the market that we do have to pay. I know how hard they work on bringing those prices down as much as they can, on bringing children back to Leeds where they can and where it's appropriate. Julie's talked about the smaller residential homes that we're looking at to bring about in the city. There are some delays around Ofsted and other issues that are outside of children's and families' control at the moment. So everything that can be done is being done to address what the overspend was last year, to ensure that that doesn't happen again in the year going forward. All that said, we are at the mercy of whatever happens in the national picture of you know, the number of children coming into local authority care for the need for our resource to then make sure that they're safe, they're looked after properly, and in the way that we'd want all our own children to be looked after.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I think, you know, I absolutely share your views about the cost of private residential care, and totally will keep working with you to try and do something about that cross-party. I've just got two last questions on this. One for Caroline again. I'd be grateful if you could comment on how much has been generated and what the impact has been of the removal of the cap for people needing more than one carer. And then just on the latter subject, how confident are we, to Julie, I guess, about the impact of all the action plans in children's services, that when we get to month one, we're not going to be again predicting an overspend?
Thank you. Caroline, then Julie, please.
Thank you. So we were very, very cautious in the way in which we implemented the removal of the cap and the 2-to-1 maximum assessed charge by making sure that we communicated with everybody that was going to be affected well in advance, gave considerable notice, and then ensured that social workers met with the individuals and their families' carers to understand any implications and impact. So it wasn't a paper exercise, it wasn't a desktop exercise, it was absolutely in discussion with each individual. We got very little by way of any concerns or complaints. We didn't even have many people who then said that they needed to stop receiving the services because of the increased charge. And we did have a flexible approach and a discretionary approach that, should that happen, we would ensure that we would apply our discretion and not remove services just because people said they couldn't afford to pay for them but were absolutely in need of them. We worked with agencies like Carers Leeds, for example, as well, and advocacy providers. So in terms of impact, we haven't seen significant detrimental impact. And we laboured the point around applying this policy to ensure that we've got consistency of approach and fairness for all people who are having to contribute to their cost of care.
Thank you. Julie, please.
Thank you, Leader. I think we've already talked this afternoon as an example about the sufficiency strategy. So I am absolutely confident that the plans that we have got in place, the various work streams that report into the delivery board, into scrutiny, have reported into exec board, and the member oversight meeting, are the right plans. You know, it is the right strategy. We've got a breadth of experience both within the Children and Families Directorate and also cross-council, you know, that absolute cross-council, cross-partnership approach. So I'm absolutely confident in the strategy and the things that we've got in place to address the ongoing demand. That does sit within the context, as Councillor Cooper has highlighted, of the national issues that we've got in terms of a broken national system and a range of challenges that are absolutely out with our control. As I've said, you know, in terms of the sufficiency strategy, we have plans in place to, as an example, increase our internal capacity in terms of children's residential homes, and in particular small group homes. That does take time. And again, things are out with our control in terms of registration, managed registration, buying properties. But I'm really, really absolutely confident that it is the right thing to do. Equally, I think, as Councillor Cooper has said, at the end of the day, we are a demand-led service, you know, and if we identify a child and if we undertake an assessment of a child and it's clear that that child needs help and protection and that that child needs to be accommodated, and that child's needs requires, you know, external residential care, then we have a statutory responsibility. And I think we would all agree that the help and protection of children is absolutely paramount. So I'm confident in the strategies, I'm confident in the direction of travel, I'm confident in the cross-council approach and the partnership approach. But equally, I'm a realist, you know, and we are working within a context. I've worked in children and families for 40 years. this year, and I've never known a time where we've experienced such major challenges in terms of demand and demography. But we've got a vocation. We've got a vocation to do our best for children and families, and we've got that that corporate responsibility and corporate commitment, and we will continue to do our best.
Thank you, Julie. Are we ready to turn to the recommendations on this item? Which the recommendations are on page 194 and 195, and I take it the board is happy with those recommendations. That's great. We'll move on to item 13, please, Councillor Coope.
Thank you, Leader. And the last item for me today is the outturn for the Treasury Management Strategy for last year. And again, extremely challenging year, but I'd like to thank the teams in finance for their work this year in keeping everything in the right order and ensuring that we actually are in a good position in terms of our borrowing and also in terms of the interest levels that we're paying. They do an extremely good job in terms of getting us the best possible value out there in the market. So I want to thank them all for the work they've done in that regard, but also in the regard of keeping our finances in tip-top condition as well. So the report speaks for itself, really. It's pleasing for me, actually, that the borrowing was actually £17 million lower than we forecast. And, we do have to think of it in terms of the amount that we do borrow, is in line with actually our fixed term assets, which are valued at over £6 billion. So I'll leave it there, Chair, for any questions, but I'm pleased with the outturn of the Treasury Management.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'd echo a lot of your comments, Councillor Cooper, particularly around what a good team that we have in this area. I think we're very lucky in Leeds to have a fantastic team. So my thanks also go to them. The bit that struck out was the comment you made at the end about debt being lower, and that's always a good thing. But the reason it's lower is because we underspent on the capital programme. So my questions were, was that a deliberate strategy, or are there reasons why certain things haven't been delivered? And then what's the impact of that as well? The positive is there's less debt. That potentially means there's things that could have been built and delivered that haven't, and contracts not awarded and jobs not created and so on. So I'm just keen to understand a little bit more about that, please.
Richard, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I think it was set out earlier in the previous report, just in terms of the capital programme position, and it sort of detailed the position as at February 2023. There was a capital programme agreed of circa about 510 million, something of that ilk, and we've outturned at about 390. The impact of that is clearly there's a significant underspend in terms of our debt budget, and that obviously has helped the financial position in the current year. The reality is, as a result of that, it's not as though schemes have disappeared. It's because a lot of schemes have slipped into the forward year, and I guess really it'd be an analysis of that slippage to understand what impact that has had in terms of the delivery of the council's ambitions, but is that assurance that there's just slippage in the schemes, not as though the schemes aren't there anymore. Okay.
So further question, is that a specific strategy that's been pursued, or is that just outside circumstances have meant those things weren't delivered in the time we anticipated?
There's probably a host of different reasons in terms of that. The reality is just when it goes into the programme, there's assumptions with regard to when the scheme be delivered, and just can be changed as circumstances, changes of funding. There'll be a whole host of reasons depending on the individual schemes as to why that's happened. But it's not a deliberate thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to turn to the recommendations that we note the report, which will take everybody does. Thank you. We're on to our last item, which is Councillor Pryor's paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is to approve the arrangements for a new bid ballot to take us from 2025 to 2030. This is on an enlarged geography to take up a bit more of the south of the city centre. It will be adding 100 additional businesses into the bid area. Really pleased that the current bid area is the largest outside of London. Incidentally, within the Leeds boundary, we also have the smallest bid up in Otley. Leeds City Council, the Leeds City Centre is clearly growing. We're getting daily footfall figures, which are broadly similar to last year, but last year was quite a significant increase on 2022. And we've had over £4 billion invested in large-scale projects in the city centre over the past decade. I'll leave it there for now. There will be further paper in December, which will include the bids business plan and also details on the Leeds City Council's own vote on the ballot.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate this is more about the administration of the bid, and we'll get a lot more detail in December, as you say, and I think that's a good time to look at the impact and benefits associated. The take-up and the increase in take-up from one year to the next suggests that people appreciate it and that it's having a good impact. So my question is really, what consultation has there been around the expansion, and is there a vision of sort of that will continue to expand over time, or where do we see the extent of this going ultimately?
Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just firstly, with a point of clarification, the next report will be in September, because it has to be before the ballot, because it's at that meeting members will be asked to endorse how the council votes in the bid ballot that then comes forward in October and November. In terms of the expansion, that's something that is a proposal that's led by the bid as an independent organisation, and they've consulted widely in terms of the stakeholders, both within that expanded boundary and other stakeholders in the city, in terms of that proposal and defining where the boundary is that you've got in the papers. So it has been consulted by them in terms of that proposition, which is why they're confident to include it in the ballot that would be forthcoming this autumn.
Thank you. Councillor Pryor, please.
It's probably worth talking as well briefly about some of the more kind of informal discussions I've had with businesses in the city centre. I know a lot of people are pleased with a lot of the work the bid's done. They run things like the dinosaur trail, for example, and when there are events such as that, there's a real noticeable uptick on the footfall, and a lot of businesses really report that there's an uptick in people spending money in the city centre. Obviously, they do a lot of work around cleaning in the city centre as well. We've even had, I think, Ruby Wax put on TikTok how clean Leeds City Centre was, and I think in large part that's due to a lot of the work of the bid. So I really want to praise them for the real value added they add to our city.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting Ruby Wax to come up today's exec board, but there we are. Okay, are we all happy with the recommendations on this report? That's great. Thank you, everybody, and I'll bring the meeting to a close there. Thank you.